The boy in the black belt pointed at the old man holding the mop and asked the whole room if they wanted to watch him put a senior citizen on the floor. His name was Brett Lassiter, 26 years old, the loudest voice in a gym that worshipped loud voices, and he said it while a dozen phones were already up and recording. The old man at the edge of the mat did not look up. He kept wringing gray water out of a string mop into a yellow bucket, the muscles in his forearms moving under skin the color of wet bark. And he let the laughter roll over him the way a seawall lets a wave break and slide back. Brett grinned wider. He liked an audience that did not fight back. The old man's name was Solomon Tatum, 63 years old. He had been mopping that floor for 11 weeks, and the reason he did not look up was not fear. It was arithmetic. He was counting how many hours of pay one wrong word would cost a little girl who was waiting for him in a one-bedroom apartment 4 miles east, a little girl whose name was Aurora and who could not yet say her own last name without stopping to breathe. That is where the story begins. Not with the fight, with the bucket and the girl and the 11 weeks before. Solomon Tatum did not move like a man who had given up. People made that mistake about him constantly, and he let them. He moved slow because slow was a decision, the same decision he had taught to 19-year-olds in a sandpit at Camp Pendleton 3 decades back. Back when his job was to take boys who thought speed was everything and break them of it until they understood that the man who panics first is the man who loses. Slow was control. Slow was a man who had nothing left to prove and everything left to protect. His mornings started in the dark. He woke at 4:40 in the apartment he shared with his granddaughter, and the first thing he did every single day was stand in the narrow kitchen and listen. He listened for the sound of Aurora breathing through the wall. She was 9. She had a heart that had been built wrong before she was born, a valve that did not close the way it should, and on bad nights her breath came with a small catch in it, a hitch like a record skipping, and Solomon had trained himself to hear that hitch from 2 rooms away, the way he had once trained himself to hear a rifle bolt in the dark. When her breathing was smooth, he made coffee. When it caught, he stood by her door until it smoothed out again, and some mornings that took an hour. And on those mornings, he did not make coffee at all. She had come to him 18 months ago. His daughter, Aurora's mother, was gone in a way Solomon did not talk about and did not let himself think about before noon, because thinking about it before noon ruined the whole day. So now it was the 2 of them. An old man and a girl with a broken valve in an apartment that smelled like the orange peels she left drying on the windowsill because she liked the way they curled. The orange peels mattered. Remember the orange peels. Aurora needed a surgery. Not an emergency, the cardiologist had said. Not this month, maybe not this year, but a surgery. And the word the cardiologist used was inevitable. And the number attached to the word, after everything insurance would not cover, was the kind of number that made Solomon do math on the back of envelopes at 2 in the morning. That number was why a man who had been a Marine combat instructor, a man whose hands had been registered with 3 different commands as the most dangerous thing in any room he stood in, was now pushing a mop across the rubber floor of a gym called Apex Combat Athletics for $14 an hour. Cash, no questions, no benefits. Take it or leave it. He took it. He would have taken less. The gym was owned by a man named Trent Kingsley, 41, who had bought the place with money that had never once passed through his own labor, and who ran it like a kingdom he had inherited rather than built. Kingsley did not fight. Kingsley stood in the glass-walled office at the front and watched the membership numbers and the social media numbers, and the thing Kingsley understood better than anyone Solomon had ever met was that fear and admiration were the same engine wearing 2 different coats. People paid to be around men who scared them a little. Brett Lassiter scared them. Brett was good for business. Solomon learned all of this in his first 11 weeks, the way an old soldier learns a new piece of terrain, which is to say quietly, completely, and without telling anyone he was doing it. He knew which lockers stuck. He knew that the heavy bag in the corner had a tear in the seam that nobody had reported. He knew that the kid who came in at 6 a.m., a thin, nervous teenager named Reed Halsey, practiced his footwork alone before anyone else arrived, and stopped the instant another person walked in, ashamed of being seen wanting it that badly. He knew that Brett Lassiter had never once, in 11 weeks, picked up after himself. And Brett knew nothing about Solomon at all. To Brett, the old black man with the mop was furniture that moved. The first morning, Solomon understood the shape of what was coming was a Tuesday in the second week. He was wiping down the mirrors along the south wall, working in the slow circular motion that kept the glass from streaking, when Brett came in early with 2 of his hangers-on and put his bag down right in the middle of the floor Solomon had just finished mopping. The floor was still dark with water. Brett looked down at his own wet sneaker prints, then looked at Solomon and smiled. "You missed a spot," Brett said. He had not missed a spot. Brett had made the spot. The 2 younger men laughed the way young men laugh when they are auditioning for someone's approval, and Solomon said, "I'll get it," and got it. He knelt and wiped the prints away, while Brett stood over him, talking about a fight he'd had at a regional tournament, and Solomon's knees, which had been jumped out of a C-130 more times than Brett had birthdays, took the cold of the floor without complaint. That was the first violation. It was small. It was supposed to be small. That was the point of it. But here is the thing the camera did not catch. The thing that none of the laughing boys saw. When Solomon knelt to wipe the floor, he glanced once, fast, at the way Brett stood, at the weight distribution, at the front foot turned slightly out, the rear heel lifted, the hands held a hair too low and a hair too wide. Solomon read Brett's stance the way a mechanic hears an engine and knows, before the hood is even up, exactly which gasket is about to fail. He read 3 openings in 2 seconds. He filed them away. He did not change his face. Then he finished the floor and emptied the bucket and went home to a girl who needed him to keep his job. The world before Solomon arrived at Apex had a sound, and the sound was Aurora's recorder. She had been given a plastic recorder at school, and she practiced hot cross buns with the relentless devotion of a child who had decided this was her thing now. And she played it in the evenings while Solomon cooked rice and beans on the 2 working burners. She could not run at recess. She could not climb the rope in gym class. The doctors had drawn a line around the things her heart would allow, and so Aurora poured everything she had into the things on the safe side of that line. And right now, the thing was the recorder. And she was, Solomon thought, getting genuinely good. Though he would have thought that if she were terrible. "Grandpa, were you really strong when you were young?" she asked him one night, the recorder in her lap. "I was all right," he said. "Reggie at school says old people get weak." "Reggie's not wrong," Solomon said. "Bodies wear out. That's the deal." He set a plate in front of her. But strong was never the most important thing. You know what was? "What?" "Knowing when not to use it," he said. "Any fool can hit a man. Took me 40 years to learn when to keep my hands down." She thought about that with the seriousness of a 9-year-old, and then she played hot cross buns again, and the catch was not in her breath that night, and Solomon went to bed grateful. And the next morning he went back to Apex and mopped the floor. He had a system for the work, and the system had a center, and the center was the bandages. Solomon wrapped his hands every morning before he touched a mop or a rag or a weight rack. The same way he had wrapped them for 40 years, knuckles to wrist in a pattern so old, his fingers did it while his mind was elsewhere. The young men assumed it was for arthritis, an old man babying old joints. They were half right. But the wrap Solomon used was not a medical wrap. It was a fighter's wrap, a specific over-under cross that protected the small bones of the hand under impact. And any man in that building who actually understood the striking arts would have recognized it instantly and known that the old janitor had thrown 10,000 real punches in his life. No one looked. That was the cold truth running underneath everything in those first weeks. No one looked at Solomon Tatum long enough to see anything at all. And Solomon, who had spent a career teaching young men that the thing you fail to see is the thing that kills you, found a bitter private humor in it and kept it to himself, and waited. He was not waiting for anything in particular. He told himself that. He was waiting for nothing. He just needed the job. The wound opened on a Thursday, and it opened in front of the one person Solomon had been most careful to keep it away from. He had thought Aurora was at her after-school program. He had the schedule memorized. He was certain of it. But the program had been canceled for a staff training day, and the neighbor who watched her, a kind, tired woman named Delia Mabry from the apartment below, had a doctor's appointment of her own. And so Delia had done the only thing she could think of and brought Aurora to the gym to wait out the last hour of Solomon's shift. Solomon turned around from coiling a jump rope, and there was his granddaughter sitting on the bench by the front desk, with her backpack in her lap and her recorder case beside her. Small in a building full of men who hit things for a living. His stomach dropped. Not because she was in danger, because she was about to see him be no one. Brett saw her too. Brett, who had a sense for an audience the way a shark has a sense for blood, registered that the old janitor had a little girl watching, and something in Brett's grin sharpened. He was in the middle of a class, a paid class, 12 students in a half circle, and Solomon was supposed to be invisible at the back of the room, replacing the torn heavy bag's chain. But Brett raised his voice. "Hey, old-timer," Brett called across the room. "You ever do any of this? Back in your day?" He threw a slow, theatrical jab at the air. "Or were you always the cleanup crew?" 12 students turned to look. Aurora turned to look. Solomon felt the whole room rotate toward him, and he understood, with the clarity of a man who has been ambushed before, that there was no good answer. If he said yes, he was a liar puffing himself up, and they would laugh. If he said no, he was exactly the nothing Brett had named him, in front of the only person on earth who thought he was something. "Little of this, little of that," Solomon said. "Long time ago." "Yeah?" Brett bounced on his toes. He was performing now, full voice, for the 12 and for the phones 2 of them had already lifted. "Show us something then. Come on. One combination. Teach the class." He spread his arms. Free lesson from the legend. The students laughed. It was not cruel laughter, not most of it. It was the easy laughter of people who assume the joke is safe because the target is harmless. But Aurora was not laughing. Aurora was watching her grandfather with her whole face, and Solomon saw in her expression the exact moment a child begins to wonder if the giant in her life is smaller than she believed. That was the cut. Not Brett's words, Aurora's doubt. That was the thing that opened in Solomon's chest and did not close. He set down the chain. He walked to the front of the room, slow, and the laughter died down into the kind of expectant quiet that crowds make when they think they are about to watch something embarrassing. Brett stepped back and gestured grandly at the open mat, master to student. Solomon stopped in the center. He looked at the 12 faces. He looked at Brett. and then he did the hardest thing he had done in 18 months. He smiled, a small, tired smile, and he shook his head. "Nah," he said. "I'm just the cleanup crew." And he walked back to the heavy bag and picked up the chain. The laughter that followed was worse than the first, because now it had a winner. Brett soaked it up. "Smart man," Brett said. "Knows his lane." And he turned back to his class, and Solomon fixed the chain with hands that knew exactly what they could have done. And across the room, a 9-year-old girl looked at the floor. In the car afterward, Aurora was quiet for a long time. Then she said very softly, "It's okay that you're not strong anymore, Grandpa." Solomon drove. He watched the road. "I know, baby," he said. He did not tell her the truth. The truth was not a gift he could give a 9-year-old in a parking lot. The truth was that he could have ended Brett Lassiter in under 4 seconds, that he had spent the entire walk to the front of that room, mapping the 6 ways to do it without leaving a mark, and that the reason he didn't was sitting in the passenger seat, humming hot cross buns to herself to feel better. And her surgery cost more than he made in 2 years. And a man who breaks a black belt's arm on camera does not keep a $14 an hour job. So he ate it. He drove home and made rice and beans and let his granddaughter believe he was a weak old man, because the alternative was letting her go without a future. That was the choice. That was the whole choice. And Solomon Tatum, who had made men twice as hard as Brett Lassiter weep in the dirt, took it without a word. The next morning, Trent Kingsley called him into the glass office. Kingsley had seen the videos. 2 of the students had posted clips of the moment. The old janitor declining to Spar, and the clips had done numbers. And Kingsley, who measured the world in numbers, had watched them with the satisfaction of a man whose product was performing. He sat behind his desk and did not offer Solomon a seat. "Done that little bit yesterday," Kingsley said. "With Brett. That was good content. People liked it." He turned his monitor halfway around so Solomon could see the view count. "You're a character now. The old guy who knows his place." He said it like a compliment. "I'm thinking we lean into it. Brett's got a following. You play the foil, it's good for the brand." "I'm here to clean," Solomon said. "You're here to do what I tell you," Kingsley said pleasantly. And there it was, the thing under the pleasantness, the thing Solomon had felt the first day. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. Membership likes the dynamic. So when Brett does his thing, you let him do his thing. You're a good sport about it. That's the job now. That's not the job you hired me for. It's the job now." Kingsley leaned back. "And I'm cutting you to part-time. Mornings only, slow season. Nothing personal, it's just numbers." He smiled. "But hey, you play ball with the Brett thing. Maybe we find more hours down the line. Up to you. Part-time. Mornings only." Solomon ran the new math in his head right there in the office, fast, the way he ran everything fast, and the math was a disaster. Part-time wages did not cover the apartment and Aurora's medication and put anything aside for the surgery. Part-time meant the envelope numbers at 2 a.m. went red. And Kingsley had built it so the only road back to full hours ran straight through becoming Brett's clown on demand. It was a trap with no clean exit, and both men knew it, and Kingsley watched Solomon's face for the moment of surrender. It did not come. Solomon's face did not move at all. "Mornings only," he repeated. Understood. He understood more than Kingsley meant him to. He understood that he had just been shown the entire architecture of the place. Kingsley did not hate him. That would have been simpler, almost kinder. Kingsley simply did not see him as a man whose dignity was real. To Kingsley, Solomon's pride was a resource to be spent, like the floor wax. and the only question was the exchange rate. Play the fool, keep the hours. Refuse, lose the girl. Solomon walked out of the glass office and went back to the mop, and the cold thing in his chest from the day before had a name now, and the name was not anger. The name was patience. He had felt it before, in other countries, in worse rooms. It was the feeling of a man who has decided to wait, and who knows how to wait, and who understands that the ground he is standing on belongs to him in a way his enemy has not yet realized. The kid found him on a Wednesday. Reed Halsey, the thin, nervous teenager who practiced his footwork alone at 6 in the morning, had been watching Solomon longer than Solomon knew. Reed was 17, the worst student in the gym by his own brutal estimation, slow and self-conscious, and convinced that everyone could see exactly how much he wanted to be good and exactly how far he fell short. He came at 6 because at 6 there was no one to see him fail. Except there was. There was the old man with the mop, who arrived at 5:40 and was always already wrapping his hands when Reed walked in. And Reed, who had nothing to do at 6 a.m. but watch, had started to see the things no one else looked at. He had seen the way Solomon set the mop down once, both hands, and the mop did not make a sound when it touched the floor. And Reed had thought, that's control. He had seen Solomon move past the heavy bag and without breaking stride, reach out and stop its swing with 2 fingers laid flat against the canvas, killing all its momentum in an instant. And Reed had thought, I can't do that, and I've trained for 3 years. He had seen the hand wraps. Reed did not know what they meant, not exactly, but he knew they were not the wraps of a man with sore wrists, and the not knowing had become a small fire in him. So on Wednesday, at 6:15, with the gym empty and gray, Reed walked up to Solomon and said, Can I ask you something, and you won't laugh at me? Solomon looked at him. I don't laugh much, he said. Go on. Who were you? Reed asked. Before this. It was the first time in 11 weeks anyone in that building had asked Solomon a question about himself. Solomon finished wrapping his left hand, the over-under cross, slow. Why do you want to know? He said. It was not a refusal. It was a test. Because I watch you stop that bag with 2 fingers. Reed said, the words tumbling now. And I watch how you stand when you don't think anyone's looking. And your feet are never wrong, never. Mine are always wrong, and yours are never wrong. And you carry buckets like they're empty when I've lifted them and they're not. And nobody else sees it but I see it. And I think you're somebody. And I think this whole place is treating you like you're nobody. And I don't understand it. The gym was very quiet. Solomon looked at this anxious, overgrown boy who had seen, alone, at 6 in the morning, what a dozen trained adults had failed to see in daylight. What's your name? Solomon said. Reed. To Reed. Solomon finished the second rap. I'm going to tell you one true thing, and then we're going to drop it. Because I need this job more than I need to be somebody. You hearing me? Reed nodded. I trained men to fight for a living, Solomon said. For the United States Marine Corps. A long time. The kind of fighting that doesn't have rules or points or a referee. I was good at it. I was one of the best in the country at it. And the most important thing I ever taught, the thing that took me 20 years to learn well enough to teach, was that the strong man's job is to protect the weak. And a man who uses what he knows to feel big in front of a crowd is not strong. He's scared. Everything loud is scared. He pulled the wrap tight. Now, we're done talking about me. Go fix your footwork. Your weight's on your heels. Get it on the balls of your feet, or you'll spend your whole life a half-second slow. And he turned and picked up the mop. But Reed did not go fix his footwork. Reed went home and did what 17-year-olds do, which is to say, he searched. He had a first name, Solomon, and a face and a branch of service and the raps and a thing the old man had said. One of the best in the country. And Reed Halsey, who could not throw a clean jab to save his life, turned out to be very, very good at finding things on the internet. The listener should understand what is happening now, because Solomon does not. The cold track is running. The thing Solomon has spent 18 months burying is being dug up by a boy in a bedroom 4 miles away, and it is going to surface at a time and in a place that Solomon will not get to choose. The next violation was not aimed at Solomon. That was what made it the one that mattered. Reed had a sparring session that Friday, his weekly humiliation, and Brett ran the advanced floor that day. Reed was not advanced. Reed should not have been on that floor at all, but Kingsley had a policy that anyone paying the premium membership could spar the advanced floor, and Reed's mother paid the premium because she wanted her shy son to come out of his shell, and so Reed put on the gloves and stepped onto the mat across from a 23-year-old who outweighed him by 40 pounds, and Brett refereed. Solomon was at the back, fixing the bag chain again when it started, and he saw the whole thing. Brett let it go long past the point where a real coach would have stopped it. The bigger student was not cruel, just careless, the way strong young men are careless, and Reed was overmatched in every way, and 3 times Reed went to the canvas, and 3 times Brett said, "Up, up, you're fine, fight through it." And the small crowd that gathers around any beating gathered, and the phones came up. Reed's nose started bleeding. He was not crying, but his eyes had the wet shine of a kid holding it together by a thread, and still Brett would not call it. "This is what you signed up for," Brett told him, loud for the crowd. "You want to wear the gloves, you take the lesson." And to the room, "Some people aren't built for this. That's not an insult. It's just biology." Laughter. Solomon set down the chain. He did not run. He did not raise his voice. He walked across the floor at his slow, deliberate pace, and he reached the edge of the mat, and he said one word, "Time." He did not say it loud. He said it the way a man says a word he has said 10,000 times and has never once had ignored, with a flat finality that came from somewhere underneath volume, and the bigger student stopped. Just stopped, mid-motion. The way bodies obey a voice that has authority woven into it before the mind catches up. The whole room felt it. Brett felt it. And Brett's face went tight, because his authority had just been overridden by the janitor in front of his audience. "Who called time?" Brett said. "I run this floor." "Kid's done," Solomon said. He was already crouched by Reed, who was sitting now, tilting his head back. "Pinch here. Lean forward, not back, you'll swallow it. Breathe through your mouth. You're all right." He said it low, just for Reed, and then he looked up at Brett. "He's done. He's done when I say he's done." Brett came off the wall of the mat. "You don't make calls in my house, old man. You mop. That's it. That's the whole job." And here, for 1 second, the entire building held its breath, because the old janitor was crouched on the mat looking up at the black belt, and something had changed in the air. And even the people who understood nothing about fighting understood that something had changed. Solomon stood. Slowly. He was shorter than Brett by an inch, but he did not seem shorter. He looked at Brett for a long moment, and the listener can see the whole map laid out behind his eyes, the 6 ways, the 4 seconds. And then Solomon picked up his bucket, and he said, "You're right. I mop." And he led Reed off the floor toward the bathroom to clean him up, and he left Brett standing in the middle of the mat having won again. Brett had won again. But he had felt the thing under the floor, and it scared him. And a scared man who cannot name his fear does the only thing he knows. He decides to destroy the thing that frightened him. That weekend, Reed Halsey finished what he had started. He found it on a defense documentary archive, of all places. A grainy training film from decades back about close-quarters combat instruction. The film was about the program, not the man. But the man was in it, younger, in fatigues, demonstrating a disarm to a row of recruits, and the narration named him. And Reed sat in the dark of his bedroom and read the name under the freeze frame, and his whole skin went cold. He found more after that. A unit history that listed him. A retirement notice from a veterans association that called him, in the careful language such notices use, the foremost hand-to-hand instructor of his generation, credited with developing techniques still in the standard curriculum. And then Reed found the one that stopped his heart, because he recognized the name in it. There was an interview, a long one, with a famous mixed martial arts coach. The coach who, as it happened, had trained the man who had trained Brett Lassiter. The lineage every student at Apex bragged about. The pedigree Brett wore like a crown, traced back through 2 coaches to this exact man. And in the interview, the famous coach was asked who had shaped him most. And the famous coach said a name. And the name was Solomon Tatum. And the coach said that everything he understood about the difference between a fighter and a brawler, he had learned from an instructor in the service. A man who had taught him that real skill was the power you chose not to use. Brett Lassiter worshipped a coach who worshipped Solomon Tatum. The man Brett had been humiliating for 3 months had built the foundation of the very thing Brett thought made him better than everyone else. Reed printed it all. He did not know what he was going to do with it. He only knew, with the absolute moral certainty of a 17-year-old who has finally found something he understands completely, that a wrong was happening, and he was now the only person besides Solomon who had the truth in his hands. The thing Brett did to destroy his fear happened on a Monday, and it was the failure, the real one, the one Solomon did not see coming and could not immediately fix. Brett had decided that the old man needed to be gone. Not humiliated, gone. As long as Solomon was in the building, the floor felt wrong under Brett's feet, and Brett, who did not have the words for what he felt, had only the instinct to remove the source. So Brett went to Kingsley with a story. The story was that the janitor had damaged equipment. Specifically, that the old man had dropped a 45-pound plate on the brand-new competition mat, the expensive one, and torn it, and tried to hide the damage. Brett had even arranged the evidence, a real tear in the real mat, made with a box cutter from the supply closet, with a dropped plate left beside it for the picture. He showed Kingsley the staged scene. He showed Kingsley a phone clip he'd taken of Solomon near that corner that morning, out of context, proving nothing, suggesting everything. And Kingsley, who wanted the dynamic but did not want the liability, who saw an old employee with no contract and no leverage and now a documented accusation, made the easy choice. He fired Solomon at 4 p.m, in front of the floor, on a Monday. He did it the way men like Kingsley do it, with a tone of regret that costs nothing. Equipment damage. Attempt to conceal it? That's gross negligence. My hands are tied. He said it loud enough to carry. I can't have someone I can't trust around the members. And the part that made it the failure, the part that turned a bad day into a wound, was that Delia Mabry had brought Aurora again, because the after-school program had a half day, and Aurora was sitting on the front bench, and she heard a man in a glass office tell her grandfather that he was a liar and a thief who could not be trusted in front of a room of people, and she watched her grandfather stand there and take it. Solomon did not defend himself. He could not. He had no proof. and the proof against him had been built to look airtight, and any argument he made would sound like exactly what a guilty man says. He looked at the staged tear, and he knew instantly it was staged. Knew it the way he knew everything about that room, but knowing and proving were different countries. So he took off his apron. He folded it, slow, and set it on the front desk. He looked at Brett, who was watching with his arms crossed and a small smile, and Solomon's face gave Brett nothing. Then he walked to the bench and held out his hand to his granddaughter, and Aurora took it. And they walked out of Apex Combat Athletics into the 4 o'clock light. An old man and a girl with a broken heart. And behind them, the door swung shut. In the car, Aurora did not hum. She held her recorder case in both hands and looked at it. Then she said, in the small, flat voice of a child who has decided something terrible, "Did you really break it and lie?" And that was the bottom. That was the lowest place Solomon Tatum went in this whole story. Lower than any country he'd ever been deployed to, because his own grandchild was asking him if he was a thief, and he could not prove that he was not. And the surgery money was now zero, and the job was gone. And there was no plan, no clever waiting, no patience that fixed this. He had been outmaneuvered by a frightened boy and a greedy man, and the cost was being paid by a 9-year-old in the passenger seat. "No," Solomon said. "I didn't, baby. But I can't prove it. And I need you to know I didn't, even if I can't prove it to anyone else. Can you believe me with no proof?" Aurora looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Yes." And she put her small hand on his arm. And Solomon, who had not cried in front of another human being in over 30 years, had to keep his eyes very hard on the road. That night, he did not make rice and beans. He sat at the kitchen table with the red envelopes and did the math one more time. And the math did not work no matter how he moved the numbers. And for the first time since the day Aurora came to live with him, Solomon Tatum did not know what he was going to do. He sat in the dark and listened to her breathe through the wall. The breath caught and smoothed and caught again. Reed Halsey heard about the firing on Tuesday and knew, the way you know a thing in your gut, that it was a lie. He had watched Solomon for 3 months. He knew, with the certainty of the only honest witness, that the man who set a mop down without a sound did not drop plates and lie about it. And Reed had a folder of printed pages on his desk that proved who Solomon really was, and now he had a second fire in him, hotter than the first, and the second fire was simply this: it is not fair. But Reed was 17 and shy, and the worst student in the gym, and what could he do? He went to Kingsley first, because he was a good kid, and that was the right order of operations, and he stood in the glass office and said he didn't believe Solomon had damaged anything. And Kingsley looked at him with the patient contempt adults reserve for children who have wandered into adult business, and said the matter was closed. So Reed did the second thing. He found another witness. In his searching, Reed had come across a local name, a man who ran a small veterans support center across town, a former Marine himself who had served in the same era. Reed, on pure nerve, went to the center after school and showed the man his folder, and the man, whose name was Augustus Pinckney, looked at the freeze frame from the training film and went very still, and then said quietly, "I trained under that program. We all knew his name." "Son, where's this man now?" "They fired him," Reed said, "from a gym, for something he didn't do. And there's this guy there, a black belt, who's been humiliating him for months and doesn't even know who he is. And the worst part is," Reed's voice did the thing 17-year-old voices do, "the worst part is the guy worships a coach who learned everything from him. He's been spitting on the man who built the thing he's proud of. and he doesn't even know. Augustus Pinckney was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me about this gym, and tell me when they're busiest." The cold track and the hot track were about to meet. The listener knows everything now. Solomon does not know that Reed has the folder. Solomon does not know that a fellow Marine has found him. Solomon does not know that the lineage connects. All Solomon knows is that he is out of work and out of money and out of time. He has stopped waiting. He thinks the story is over. It is not over. It is about to turn all the way around. The confrontation that ended it was not one Solomon engineered. He would never have walked back into that building. It was engineered by Brett Lassiter himself, out of the very thing that had driven him the whole time, which was fear that needed an audience to feel like courage. Apex held a monthly event called the Open Floor, the biggest day of the month, where members brought guests and there were demonstrations and the whole gym was packed and every phone was out. Kingsley loved it. The numbers were always huge, and Brett, riding high on having removed the thing that frightened him, decided that the open floor was the perfect stage to fully close the chapter, to put a final period on the legend of the old janitor he had bested. He posted about it. He said, on his account, to his following, that he was going to address the rumors about the washed-up old man some people online were turning into a folk hero, and that anyone who thought the geezer was secretly some kind of warrior should come watch him set the record straight. Reed saw the post. Reed sent it to Augustus Pinckney, and Augustus Pinckney made one phone call to an old man sitting in a dark apartment doing math that did not work, and said 9 words. "Solomon, this is Gus Pinckney. They need you." Solomon had not heard that name in 20 years. He listened. He said almost nothing. And then he looked through the wall toward his granddaughter's room, and he made a decision, and the decision was not about pride. It was about something he had told a boy at 6 in the morning weeks ago, the thing that took 20 years to learn well enough to teach. The strong man's job is to protect the weak. There were a lot of weak people in that building, weak in the way that mattered, and one of them was a 17-year-old who had told the truth at cost, and one of them was a frightened young man drowning in a lie about himself, and Solomon Tatum had spent his whole life walking toward exactly this. "All right," he said, "I'll come." He came on the day of the open floor. He did not bring Aurora. He brought instead the folder, because Reed had pressed it into Pinckney's hands, and Pinckney brought it to Solomon, and Solomon had read it for the first time the night before, and had sat with the strange experience of seeing his own forgotten life laid out in another man's words. He came in his street clothes. He came at the busiest hour, when the floor was packed 3 deep and the phones were thick as a field of grass turned toward the sun, and when Brett Lassiter, mid-speech, mid-performance, looked up and saw the old janitor walk through the door, his face did a thing the whole room saw. The room went quiet, but not the cheap quiet of a held breath. It went quiet the way a room goes quiet when the actual center of gravity walks in, and everyone's body knows it before their mind does. Solomon walked to the edge of the mat. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. "You called me out," he said to Brett. "Online. Told all these people to come watch you put the old man in his place." He looked around the room, at the phones, at the guests, at Kingsley standing frozen in the door of the glass office. "So here I am. But before you teach me my lesson, I'd like to say one thing. And then if you still want to spar, we'll spar. In front of everybody. For real." Brett's mouth opened. The crowd had come for spectacle, and the spectacle was building itself. "Say your thing, old man," Brett said. But the swagger had a thin place in it now. Solomon did not pull out the folder. That was not how he did things. He looked at Brett and he said, "Who taught you?" "What?" "Oh, your coach. The man you brag about. Who taught him?" Brett named his coach. Then, when Solomon waited, Brett named his coach's coach, the famous one, the lineage, the crown. "And who taught him?" Solomon said. Nobody knows that," Brett said. "Some old military guy. It's not—" "Solomon Tatum," said Augustus Pinckney from the doorway, in the parade ground voice of a man who has not used it in years and finds it still works. He stepped into the room. "United States Marine Corps. Lead close combat instructor, 3 commands. The man your coach's coach calls the reason he knows the difference between a fighter and a thug." Pinckney held up the folder, and then he did something better than reading it. He set it on the front desk, open, and said, "It's all here. Anybody who wants to read it, read it. I'm not going to stand here and recite a man's life at him. The truth doesn't need a speech." The room did not erupt. It did something quieter and far heavier. Phones that had been pointed at Brett turned one by one toward Solomon and then toward the open folder, and you could see in real time the story the crowd had been told about the old janitor crack down the middle and fall away. Brett stood in the center of his own floor, and the floor was no longer his. "Here is where the engine of the peak runs. Watch the separations." Brett laughed, a single sharp sound, and it died in the air with nothing to land on. He looked at the folder on the desk, and he did not walk over to read it because some part of him already knew. His weight shifted to his back foot, the heel lifting. The exact tell Solomon had read on the very first morning, and only Solomon and Reed and Pinckney in that whole room knew what that small motion meant. A bottle of water on the front desk sat with its plastic ticking faintly as it warmed, the only sound. That doesn't mean anything," Brett said finally. "Maybe he trained somebody 40 years ago. Doesn't mean he can do anything now." And he turned to the crowd to win them back. The old reflex, the audience as oxygen. "He's still just an old man. Let's settle it. Right now. Him and me. Let's see the warrior." And he stepped onto the mat and dropped into his stance and gestured Solomon forward, and the crowd, against its own newer instinct, leaned in. Because a part of every crowd will always want to see the thing happen. Solomon looked at the stance. He looked at it the way he'd looked at it the first morning. Front foot out, rear heel high, hands a hair too low and too wide. 3 openings in 2 seconds. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, and somewhere a treadmill belt, left running, slapped its slow, empty rhythm against the deck. Solomon stepped onto the mat. He did not raise his hands. He stood in front of the black belt with his arms loose at his sides, in his street clothes, an old man with no guard up at all, and he said, "I'm not going to fight you." "Course you're not," Brett started, reaching for the win. "I'm not going to fight you," Solomon said again, cutting it clean. "Because the whole point of what I spent my life teaching is that you don't. You've got a crowd. You've got phones. You want me to put you down so you can either beat me and be a man who beat up a senior citizen, or lose to me and have a reason. Either way, you get to keep being the man who needs the room to tell him he's somebody." He took one step closer, inside the range where Brett's stance was useless, close enough that Brett flinched without meaning to. "I trained the man who trained the man you bow to, and the first thing I ever taught him is the thing you never learned. Power you have to show people isn't power. It's begging." The room was so still that the slap of the empty treadmill belt was the loudest thing in it. "You hit a tired old man's reputation," Solomon said, quiet, just loud enough. "You hit a 17-year-old kid's nose. You set up a tear in a mat with a box cutter from the supply closet, and you let a man get fired in front of his grandchild for it." He saw Brett's face change at box cutter, The precise detail no innocent man would know to deny, and so did the crowd. That's who you are when you think nobody who matters is watching. I taught warriors. You're not one, and the saddest part is you could have been. You've got the hands. You never got the heart, because nobody ever made you sit still long enough to find it. He stepped back off the mat. He turned to the room. I'm not going to hurt this boy, Solomon said to all of them. He's already losing the only fight that ever mattered, and he's losing it in front of all of you, and he doesn't even know it yet. And he walked to the front desk and picked up the open folder and closed it, gently, the way he set down a mop, without a sound. It was Kingsley who broke. Kingsley, in the office doorway, who had heard box cutter and supply closet, and watched the crowd's faces and felt the membership numbers and the brand and the liability all reverse polarity at once. Kingsley who said, too loud, "Brett, my office. Now." And in saying it, confirmed every single thing Solomon had just laid out, because an innocent accusation does not end with the accuser being summoned. And Brett Lassiter stood alone in the center of a mat that was no longer his, in front of 100 phones, in a silence that he had built and could not fill. And for the first time in his life he understood that the room was not on his side, and that it never had been, and that the only thing holding it had been his volume, and his volume was gone. The dominoes fell over the following weeks, each one a real moment, not a summary. The clips went out that night, but not the clips Brett had wanted. The clip that traveled was Solomon stepping inside the range and saying power you have to show people is begging, and under it, in 100,000 captions, was the folder, the training film, the lineage. The famous coach, the one at the top of Brett's crown, saw it within 48 hours and posted his own message, unprompted, naming Solomon as the man he had spoken about for years, the instructor who taught him the difference, and asking publicly why this man had been pushing a mop and why he had been fired. The post was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was disappointed, and it had reach, and it named the gym. Kingsley's numbers reversed the way Solomon had said power reverses. The dynamic that had been good for the brand became the brand, and the brand was now a place that humiliated and then framed a decorated veteran. Premium memberships, the Reed-Halsey kind, the parents who paid to build their children's character, evaporated first. Within a month, Apex Combat Athletics was a husk. Within 2, it had a new name and new ownership, and Trent Kingsley's name was attached permanently, in every search, to the thing he had done, the man who fired the Marine instructor to protect a bully's brand. He sold the place at a loss. The thing about a reputation built on numbers is that numbers go both directions. Brett Lassiter did not get a redemption arc. The story does not owe him one. He left the area. The black belt that had been his identity meant nothing in a town where everyone had watched him beg a crowd to validate him and watched the crowd decline. The last anyone heard, he was training alone somewhere. And maybe Solomon's words about the heart found their slow way into him, and maybe they didn't. Some men sit still long enough. Most don't. The story does not pretend to know which one Brett was, because real stories don't get to know everything. Augustus Pinckney's Veterans Center got a flood of attention it had never had, and used it the way Pinckney used everything, quietly and completely. And within the year, it had funded programs it had been begging for grants to run for a decade. And Reed-Halsey. Reed, the worst student in the gym, the boy who saw what no one else looked at. The truth he told cost him the only place he had ever trained, because the gym closed, and his mother's premium membership was gone, and his shot at coming out of his shell through martial arts seemed for a few weeks over. But Reed had told the truth at cost, and the truth had a way of paying back. Because here is where the risen meet the fallen. Solomon Tatum did not become rich. The story does not lie about that either. But the famous coach's post did a thing that money could not. It reached people who had trained under the program decades ago, men who remembered the name, and they did what old Marines do, which is take care of their own without making a speech about it. A fund came together for Aurora's surgery, organized by Pinckney, filled in small amounts by 100 men who had once been broken down and built back up by a hard, quiet instructor in a sandpit. And the number that had not worked at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning was suddenly just a number, and then it was paid. Aurora had her surgery in the spring. The valve was fixed. The catch went out of her breathing, and Solomon, who had trained himself for 18 months to hear it through the wall, lay awake the first few nights after she came home, listening for a hitch that no longer came, and had to teach himself a new thing, which was how to sleep in a quiet that meant she was safe. He took a new job because he was not a man who sat still. He took it at Augustus Pinckney's center, teaching finally the thing he had spent a career learning. He did not teach men to hurt people. He taught the boys and girls who came through the center the thing that took him 20 years to learn well enough to teach. The thing about the heart. The thing about when to keep your hands down. And his first student, the one he asked for by name, the one he put in the front of the room because the kid needed to be seen, was Reed Halsey. Reed's footwork is still not great, but his weight is on the balls of his feet now, and he is half a second faster than he was, and he is no longer afraid of being watched, because the man who taught him to fix it is watching. And that, it turns out, is a different kind of watching entirely. In the evenings now, Solomon Tatum comes home, and his granddaughter is on the windowsill side of the kitchen, and the orange peels are still there, curling and drying because she still likes the way they curl, and she still plays the recorder, though she has moved on from hot cross buns to something with more notes in it, something she has to breathe deep to get through. And now she can. He makes rice and beans. She plays. The catch is gone from her breath. She asked him once, after everything, why he didn't just fight the bad man, when he could have. Solomon set the plate in front of her, the way he always did. Because you were watching, he said. She thought about that, the way she thought about everything, seriously, and then she nodded like it was the most obvious thing in the world, and she picked up the recorder, and she played. Solomon could have proven himself in 4 seconds, and he chose to spend 3 months being underestimated instead, because someone he loved needed him to keep his hands down. Have you ever held back your real strength, your real anger, your real self, because the cost of showing it would land on someone you love more than your own pride? And the harder question underneath that one, how many people are you walking past right now? The quiet ones, the cleanup crew, who are far more than the smallest thing you've decided they are. Tell me in the comments about a time you were underestimated, or a time you almost missed someone's true worth. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that quiet is not the same as weak.